hopefully today we're going to take a little digital journey and go over some basics and then grow into a couple different quote-unquote hot topics. I think we'll get some differing opinions, which I think is always good for a panel. And I also want to introduce Brody Hatch with Blue Door.
Now with Blue Door.
Previously with Punch and Pepper, but I'll let you give like a little 3-minute bio.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as in-depth as yours, but for me, I started in the hospitality business working with Fairmont Hotels for about 6 or 7 years ago. From there, I moved into the tech space. I've always loved hospitality. I've always loved the connection of people to people. And from there, I moved into Shopify. I did communications there.
Everybody know what Shopify is?
Sorry, yeah, Shopify, yeah. So an e-commerce platform. And from there, it really opened up my eyes to how I could connect both the restaurant industry specifically and the tech side of the industry. Because I realized with the one client that I had, it was a very big disconnect. And from there, I started my company called Punch and Pepper. This was about 4 or 5 years ago. And from there, was acquired by Blue Door Communications literally last week.
They're going through all that fun marketing
Good for
stuff.
you.
Yeah. It's great. It's great. Yeah, no, it's good.
And then Chris is now with Major Tom. They have offices everywhere. You want to kind of give a high-level overview about kind of what makes your company unique in the space?
Sure. Thank you, Stephen, for that introduction. You didn't embarrass me too much. After that 2-week tenure, Stephen said to me, "Christopher, you must never wear white socks with a suit again." And I didn't. No, not
just like him.
Yes. Yeah. But I think that Stephen gave me my first chance at business and took a chance on me, and I'll be forever grateful for that. And then when I started my company in the year 2000, it was called Success Marketing. We did search engine optimization, which I know you talked about yesterday. And last year, we decided to rebrand our company as Major Tom, based on David Bowie's.
I said ground control.
Right, you got it.
And really what that was about was that and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but we discovered that search engine optimization and paid media and paid social, things like that, were becoming commoditized. Google AdWords was being done by robots. And if we stayed as 6S marketing, it was a race to the bottom. And so we rebranded after hiring an external branding agency. So as an agency, we hired an external branding agency, and we wanted to position around strategy and taking the time and the space to evaluate the situation that we're in. I think that you as consultants are positioned very well in today's day and age and where we're going with all of this. Anyway, so we decided to rebrand around time and space, and the name Major Tom was born. So, we have 3 offices. I've opened all 3 of them. Lived in New York for a couple of years. I then moved to LA, opened that office, then had to shut it down, and now it's just a WeWork because we got the timing wrong. But that's a brief history of
Toronto.
Yeah, in Toronto. I moved to Toronto in November to scale the office here. So I'm an infrastructure person. I put the infrastructure in place, hire the right people, try and scale up, and then move on to the next location. Many of you are familiar with that model.
Perfect. So,
I'm sorry, still in New York?
We do. We have 4 people in New York. Madison Ave, of course, and 33rd.
And Vancouver.
In Vancouver. Something we did that was interesting in Vancouver is we just bought our office space there. We realized we were paying rent for 20 years, and we had a good history of cash flow, and so now we're paying a mortgage instead of rent. So trying to think outside the box and innovate always.
Brody's based, Blue Door's based here in Toronto, and for that we do have a couple of, I think it's mostly U.S. here, and then a few France and Canada, but I think some people might recognize a few of the restaurants that you guys.
We work with restaurants, hotels, spas, and bars, and we just recently got into the Canada space. So literally yesterday was a crazy day in Ontario because we opened up the first and only retail cannabis store in Toronto.
And your firm did that?
And we did that, yeah.
So we had a panel yesterday afternoon called Mary Jane 101, and we had Alison Gordon here, and David Phillips,
Yep.
and George Torrey, John's son,
Yep.
And we had a riveting conversation on that yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think when Chris and I were just outside talking, is that it's an interesting space because there's a lot of gray area right now, right? They're figuring out how to best manipulate, how to best legislate it in some ways. It's very different how you would do that in, let's say, a state, one of the states in the U.S. versus how you can do it here in Ontario. Is that we can't technically show the marijuana. We can't. There's a lot of things that we can't do from a social and content perspective. So there's a lot of things that we have to learn around that space. But to give you an idea, yes. So some of the restaurants that we're working with are Assembly Chefs Hall. We work with the Thompson Hotels. We work with Basil Box, which is a franchise here. We work with Tequila Tromba, Lost Craft Beer, Amsterdam Brewery. So we're starting to really get to this consumer packaged goods space as well.
Perfect. So yesterday when I got up here and had a chance to speak, we talked about like the basics of your digital foundation, whether that be hotel or restaurant or as individual consultants and what that looks like. So we talked about the website, we talked a little bit about blogging, and even the panel this morning on food and beverage did talk about social media as well. So what do you consider some of the foundational pieces in terms of building that digital strategy? What to make sure you have a holistic approach? What are some of the different varying pieces that you need?
I'll start. So I mean, when we first sit down with a client, it's number one is what do you value most? It's so different for many different restaurants, and it also based on how that company is structured too. So most of the time we're dealing with C-level. I've been in the position 5-6 years ago where if I wasn't dealing with C-level, it was a system of broken telephone. But then at the end of the day, when you had to go and present everything, it was all based on just the wrong person leading that team in the first place. And again, it's a high turnover rate business for the most part. And then again, specific to restaurants. But you have to understand what they value most and what is that KPI going to be for them. Sometimes, I mean, for the most part, when it comes to social, they're always, I want more followers. Okay, like we all get it, and then they go into the influencer bit, and sometimes that's also a bit of a gray area. But to strategize,
We'll get to that in a minute. So.
Yeah. To strategize around it, so understand what they value most, and in terms of their content pillars, what are the ones that make them the most money, and how do we best build the structure around that? And the content needs to revolve around that in a strategic way, so that we're not just putting out things out there that's a lot, again, not so much fluff, and also at the same time not directly selling to them and becoming a robot. So finding strategic ways to build out that content that makes the most sense for their business and how they make the most money.
You use the term right now, content pillars. I want to come back to. In terms of though, Chris, the foundational piece. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about defining that target audience, whether that be demographics, psychographics, kind of what goes into play with that when you're putting together a digital campaign.
Yeah, I think just because it's digital marketing, it's still rooted in fundamentals marketing. Who's your target audience and market, and I think there's a trend towards developing personas around that, and truly understanding who you're trying to reach and where they're participating digitally. Then I think that also recognizing that there's a fundamental change in behavior, and that you are trying to tell a story over time, and you're trying to move people through a funnel or a flywheel, but that you're going to have multiple points of engagement with them. It's not a one hit and then try and close them right away. And so that's probably been the biggest fundamental shift in what do people want to see at each step of the decision-making process. So I think that later on we'll talk a little bit about remarketing and retargeting, but if your clients have a reservation system or a booking engine, recognizing that someone has started that process and abandoning, how can you deal with that? When you have their email address, when you don't have their email address? And what stories can you tell to try and loop them back into the behavior that you're looking to influence?
And even it's just to go back, it's like even part of that process, working with restaurants, sometimes they just don't have the right tools or the right reservation systems for us to even allow us to track that. OpenTable, for the most part, it's pretty two-dimensional. Whereas you can use another platform, something like 7 Rooms, where from a social perspective, it's a gold mine because we can track every individual link or any individual media outlet or any individual platform that they can make a reservation on and account it for our services, our efforts.
Doesn't Square at least give you some type of secondary direct communication piece, or no?
Square?
Yeah.
They might, but for restaurants, they don't typically do that. For reservations for seating them. But from a retail perspective, I'm sure they do. They're pretty easy.
I've gotten interactions from Square
I have to.
only for retail.
I've had it at restaurants too. I guess it come earlier today's panel. One of the guys was ready to pay about how at restaurants being able to pay when you want to pay on the customer, not having to wait on someone. So, and he talked about that.
Download an app.
What does 7 Rooms do that Open Table doesn't do?
Sorry?
What does 7 Rooms do that Open Table doesn't do?
Yeah, so I think we've now transitioned 3 or 4 different restaurants into 7 rooms. Open Table is definitely going to get you the traffic through their network. It's just the gamification, the ability to get points and use that towards free whatever is very addicting to people, as it is for many things when you gamify them. But the difference between the two is that Open Table, you cannot track a specific link, for example. And they also provide that network of people in the area that might be searching for a restaurant. 7 Rooms, on the other hand, it's strictly the reservation platform. It doesn't provide a 7rooms.com place where you go in and look for a restaurant. That doesn't exist. It's more so that they give you the reservation platform, which is almost identical to Open Table, minus the fact it doesn't use an Open Table, a network of people that bring you in business. But that's where Open Table makes their most money.
Yeah, I think it's about who owns the customer data. Right?
Exactly. I spoke to Hackathon Group in Las Vegas, and they said that's why they chose 7 Rooms, because they're now proprietary. They own the data. And that's really important.
And that's the best thing is that if you, going back to, I think we're going to touch base on database, but building a stronger customer profile, that's how we can target the best.
Okay, so in terms of foundational pieces, we've talked about defining your target audience, making sure you understand that buyer journey, whatever that may be, having a strong website with some kind of SEO on it, and we'll get into strategies of database, but no matter what stage you are, making sure that you have some type of database collection system or technology, and then social and content marketing. So I want to talk a little bit about, we'll get into content marketing.
I have a database hack.
Okay.
I don't know when a good time to use this is, but
Go for it.
sometimes when speaking to groups like this, they're like, well, I don't have a database, or I'm trying to build a database for the first time, or my database is small. LinkedIn allows you to export your contacts. So you can go into your LinkedIn profile, export all of your connections. If you're a connector like Steven, you have thousands, I'm sure. No, well, I think I have hundreds. But you could then export that into a format, open that in a spreadsheet program of your choice, go and manually clean that up, and it's a very good starting point to kick off a newsletter or kick off a lookalike audience. I think you have to be careful in terms of legislation and can spam and things like that, and how you handle it. But if you can identify your personal contacts that you've had direct email communication with in the past, it could be a good starting point.
Well, this came up in the
Canada has much more aggressive personal information and targeted marketing laws than in America.
There is an implied permission with LinkedIn, though, and so there's a gray area that you venture into. If you connect on LinkedIn, you've implied that you can reach out to that person. If you also go to the info tab, you can extract their email address, but instead of doing it one at a time, you can go file, export, save, open in this, clean it up, database stuff.
One of the speakers yesterday, she talked about GDPR, and I know it's coming, at least from a U.S. standpoint, it's coming. But as it stands right now, and if someone, I talked with Chuck and I even Googled it to confirm. So GDPR will put more limitations in terms of what that email marketing looks like. But as it stands right now, it can spam. And technically, if you get somebody's address that you have not contacted before, as long as you identify in that email piece that this is an advertisement and give them that option to unsubscribe, you can still reach out to them as it stands right now in the United States.
In Canada, you cannot. You have to ask them once a year
Yes.
if they would like
Ask permission.
if they would like to continue to receive information from you.
Even if on every one of the messages it says you can
Yes.
unsubscribe
Yes.
anything?
Candidate, you have to ask them.
How's that? Which is good.
I agree.
How's it monitored? Poorly. Not very well, and there is a long list of people that are abusing the system with all sorts of nefarious methods that are going to be maybe prosecuted way ahead of the average marketer.
Since we're on the subject of databases, can you just speak really briefly, Chris, to the lookalike campaigns, because you're rolling into some advertising platforms. So let's talk about that a little
Well, and that's the other thing is that, I mean, with email open rates where they are today, people are receiving emails on their mobile devices, the email open rates are really poor. But you can use that email database in other ways. You can upload it to Google or LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, Instagram, and you can run lookalike audiences off of that. So you can take your top customers or your clients' top customers and put them into the system and say, I want other customers that look like this. And then I only want them in the Seattle area or in Florida or in Winnipeg, and then do your targeting that way. So I like databases from a data perspective, not necessarily from, I'm going to target them via email perspective. You can also promote your content to the people that you have in your database the same way. You don't just need to run a lookalike off of that. So, Facebook got in a fair bit of trouble recently with the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal, but that's because those groups really were pushing the boundaries and the limits of what's possible on these platforms. And it's also very economical to use your own data to target instead of reaching out to a new audience that you don't necessarily have permission to engage with.
So one of the platforms you mentioned you lookalike was Facebook, Instagram. I know I'm a fan. Brody, I think you're a fan too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think even touching off like the lookalike audience, if you have a restaurant that is a Mexican restaurant that it sells tequila, and that our demographic is very much that demographic, creating a lookalike audience to get new customers is far easier because we know that that's their interest. That's the customer interest. And so lookalike audience are from a database perspective, going back to building a more stronger customer profile, it's easier to create a stronger lookalike audience.
And why do we like these two? And why do we put them together the way when we were talking?
For Facebook and Instagram? Yeah, because it's easier they're owned by the same company, it's Facebook. And when you go into Business Manager, not to be too technical, is that it's very easy to create one ad and it goes to both platforms. So, and it's easier to change that creative asset to cater towards how people behave within that platform. Usually you have a very different demographic from what people are, from the people that are going on Facebook versus the ones that are going on Instagram. And how they behave is very different as well. So being able to have one platform and be able to take one ad and be able to separate it out very easily without going to 80 different places to do it is really something.
Do you feel like you have to pay to play in the social space?
Definitely. I don't think that's the biggest thing when we're pitching clients is that we need to understand what their budget is. If it's a low budget, we come in with a very realistic expectation. We're really there to keep it alive if they don't have a budget. We'll come up with more creative ways of developing the content in terms of photography or videography or whatnot from an organic perspective, but you definitely need to put some money behind some of your main initiatives.
Well, there's a reason for that. And I think Facebook, Instagram now, the numbers are saying that your own fan base, people that have liked your page or liked your client's page, to reach your own fan base organically without paying, Facebook will show your content to about 3% without paying. As soon as you pay, 100%. So that pay-to-play model, and it's true across all of the platforms. I'm glad you mentioned that Facebook owns Instagram because not everyone knows that Microsoft owns LinkedIn. Even though they're two separate publicly traded companies, Microsoft owns LinkedIn, and LinkedIn has the most amazing B2B data that they're now feeding into Microsoft and Microsoft products and back again. So moving forward, I love LinkedIn from a B2B perspective.
So as it relates to, because you did mention budget and pay into play, so putting aside that social budget. But in the whole scheme of things, how would you compare social to something more traditional like Google AdWords Google Ads now? I gotta catch myself.
Yeah, I think
Something more traditional like Google Ads.
I think how many people run Google Ads or have their for clients?
And what was were you happy with your ROI?
As a rule of thumb, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the ROI is pretty good on the number of clients, right? And the clients are getting a much richer ROI on that display ad itself. But more importantly, they're also getting organic growth as well, because it's no secret that the algorithm is financially driven in Google. And so that's so that you see the ROI in both places.
You have to, Stephanie, you have to manage it though.
Do absolutely, and I think.
But I just don't see. I guess the point we're trying to make from your money goes a lot farther in the social space than AdWords. I mean, within hotels, it's your budget from a specifically AdWords standpoint. When you're competing against Expedia and Booking.com, you'll never have enough money to drop in the bucket. And I think it depends on the space and what you're going after as well from a.
Yeah, and also I think that Facebook, Instagram, hugely economical. 80 to 90% of people that live in a metropolitan city are using that platform for, whatever reason. Maybe not as much into the rural areas, but those are not likely our target market anyway. So, but what I also like about Facebook and Instagram is that you can recognize. And you do this on all platforms, but you can recognize that someone's been on your website, and then you can show them another piece of interesting social content, whether that's a video or images or the new restaurant opening or something like high impact pieces. And so while they're not necessarily on Facebook looking to book a room or book a table, you're able to continue that story and conversation, recognize that behavior, bring them back in for another experience.
Yeah, and I think that's also right to go off of that too, is that even for restaurants or for hotels, like for example, like the Thompson Hotel, it's on social to promote a booking of a conference room. It's not the most engaging. Not as many people want to know what beverages and food offerings you have and how great your meeting can be. So that's more of a dark post. Whereas if they at least go in and they're engaging on the website, we can at least then send out and purposely target those people outside of that social realm where it likes to be a little more engaging. And I think being able to have that ability to know from Instagram and from Facebook who's watching what pieces of content on a website, which again I think we're going to get into like how important a website really is that we're able to then show content based on an interest they've already taken.
And would you say? Go ahead.
Sorry, we talk a lot about Facebook and Instagram, but I wanted to ask you, because that's kind of content that you're getting, that you're reading. Other social media platforms like Mapster, for example, where now you're extending the experience of the customer, because now, for example, you're a Kimpton Hotel, for example, and you say, okay, you sign up on our Mapster map, and now you're going into the city, you get tangible experiences because now you see what Kimpton Hotel is recommending in the city, or which restaurants they're recommending. Is that not something that is going to be a little bit more enriching to engage your clientele?
For sure, and it really all depends again going on what the client values the most and what their budgets are. So right now, specific from hotels, like we're not involved with Mapster whatsoever. Like there's nothing in there that we're working with, just because the clients that we have people internally already dealing with those things.
I was going to say it's more about where that user is in the funnel. So AdWords targets them somewhere different versus social. And there's different pieces of social that target them in different stages of that funnel. And something like that is more of probably a loyalty building thing and a, returning guest visitor type thing. So I think you have to look at where that customer is and, kind of continue that cycle and hitting them at different places all the time.
John has a question.
Yeah, so, and we talked about this briefly last night, but I was curious if others have an opinion. Rule of thumb, budget for this e-commerce space, well, in a hotel. What's a typical rule of thumb for a budget, both big number and spread between the different categories of SEO versus display versus social? Realizing it varies, but I mean, at some point, like I'm in an asset management role, right? So I actually want to understand when somebody comes to me with a number, does it make sense? Does it make sense? I mean,
Let's say you go to you guys, so it's a 200 room, unbranded, very cool boutique hotel, just like Thompson.
Okay, like
Well,
Chris
no,
said.
that's not really but that's okay. I'll take that.
How much did you spend?
Go ahead.
Well, I go back to what we used to pay a travel agent to get a booking, and that would be 10%. So I think that paying under 10% of the booking value is what you should spend. So you do need to have the ROI tracking capabilities in place to then look at what I spent in social and what I spent in Google AdWords and what did it yield in terms of revenue, and then reverse engineer what you could pay per click.
So 10% of whatever you expect to come through those sources, so those not of your total sales, I assume you mean. You would not
from those sources. From those sources
right,
specifically, and you're able to map that all the way back
Right.
to those sources. So
Right.
when you're setting up your Facebook campaign that you're using, I know you said not to get too technical, but using either the booking engine tracking link or using Google Analytics tracking link and making sure that that's set up to a campaign and you're saying this is how much money I'm putting into the campaign, this is what it yielded, and working with the revenue manager or whoever it is to reverse engineer that.
Well, and because of our conversation last night, I'm going to expand because in the Hilton Marriott IHG world, we don't have access to analytics or Omniture or whatnot. So you have to get a little bit more creative with the tracking, whether it's a specific rate code built through revenue management. Hilton and Marriott do have some tracking capabilities in terms of you can get a specific URL with a predefined tracking measure, but it's not as easy as building like a Google Tag Manager, and you can build it.
I think rate code's a great way to do it. I mean, a unique landing page that's set up, you have to at least be able to set that up, and if the brand won't let you do that, then well,
And you can do that with Hilton and with Marriott, but not with IHG.
no, please.
I wanted to hear you. There are two numbers. One number is what percent of my budget am I spending on promotion and advertising in general? What percent of that ought to be digital? There's a fair amount of research out there that says what those percentages are. Fine, classic. But the second was dead on what you were saying. Maybe you could speak to that. And the second was, it's really what is your cost of sales, a percent of what you're generating from a particular channel or a particular activity. Is that the kind of numbers that people should be looking at?
I think those are the only numbers that you can look at.
All right.
In order to truly track the ROI, it's funny though, we hold digital to a different standard than we do, some of the traditional mediums like print or, radio or Spotify or TV commercial or the video that plays on the entertainment system in room. We hold Instagram and Facebook to we set the bar much higher because we need to understand the ROI. I think that the rate code tracking with landing page will work for some brands, not all brands. It'll work for the majority, but I think that we also have to push back on the people that own that data because there are people at the brands that have access to that data.
Story of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we opened the JW Marriott and the Douglas in Vancouver at the Park Casino, as well as the 6 restaurants and the whiskey tea room. We did the social media. We worked with an influencer there who came and stayed in the hotel for a whole month. And, at the end, they said, what's the ROI of that? And we said, we don't know.
Yeah.
We can estimate what it was, and I think that estimate was probably pretty accurate. Going back to calculating the budgets, though, I think that, for B2C, a number like 10% of overall revenue, I think that we've hit the tipping point in digital where more than 50% should be spent in digital. I think that you also have to build in the costs of your employees and the overhead, your website, the maintenance, all of that needs to be factored into that spend too.
Technology systems, CRM,
Exactly.
CRS, things like that, which some people don't have a grasp on.
Yeah,
The back end.
the back end. With CRM, I think that's almost every business needs that now. So I pull that out of marketing, just so we get more money into marketing.
But I guess when it comes, but I feel like that's not, and I feel like that, yes, those are good rules of thumb and you guys are intelligent, you get it, but I feel like I deal with so many owners. I mean, all of them are like smaller management companies, 5 to 15 hotels, and I'm going from zero budget to, I'm just trying to get you to spend something. So everything's a case study. So I'm just like, if I got 10%, I would be like doing a happy dance, but I never get. I mean, I realistically never
Yeah.
get that type of
True.
money.
For my
So-
consultancy, we use 5.
Right.
We use
Okay.
5. For our
Okay.
B2B consultancy, we use 5%.
Brody, a question for you. Can you give us a specific case study of how you helped rebrand a restaurant, and what you did and how what the impact was?
Yeah, I mean, I can go over one that we just launched 2 days ago, which was the sauce on John Street.
Okay.
So, and it's actually quite interesting. It was my first ever client back when I was doing freelancing when I was working at Fairmont. And we rebranded it from the ground up. So we went over the brand guides, we did everything from what the brand's gonna look like, how to best utilize the brand, and then from there, gave it over to designers. The designers designed the space. And through that process, we knew we were coming in on a retainer level from a social media management and advertising. So there's a lot of infrastructure pieces and questions we always ask. What is your reservation platform? Because again, 7 rooms, open table, whatever that might be. In this case, it didn't really matter because it was a QSR, it was a quick serve. So we asked what their POS system was, because the POS system, I've dealt with many, and usually the best ones are the ones you can do duplicated codes, for example, so you can create campaigns that are unique and you know there's no duplications or any type of abuse in those type of campaigns. Silverware, for example, doesn't do that. Square does, and it's great because we can create ads with unique codes. So from that perspective, we then go into how do we best collect data, and we will kind of maybe touch on it, but I'll try not to geek out as hard as I possibly can on it, but doing social Wi-Fi for me in the past 2 years has been incredible. Such a great tool to be able to collect that data and build a stronger customer profile. And so just to give you an idea of what social Wi-Fi is.
He's gonna say.
Sorry, I don't know. So social Wi-Fi, for example, is how you connect to a Wi-Fi and you can sign in through Facebook, Connect, or put in your own emails. And that for me was a big question for them because it's so easy. And I knew that they weren't going to open for about 2 months. And the fact that because they had acquired the space already, that they could easily connect something like that and collect data from people off of the street or in surrounding areas. So we would come in with a database at launch already just because they signed into the Wi-Fi next door. That's one example. But the other thing why I say I geek out hard on this is because we can take whoever has the ZenReach is specific to the platform. If you guys wanted to take that as a note, ZenReach is the company, and it's wherever there's a ZenReach Wi-Fi node, ZenReach allows us to take that data from, even if Subway or big brands use that Wi-Fi network, we could technically then go to them and ask for a custom list of that because they legally have it, and then target to them. And then if we can show them a Facebook or Instagram ad, we can then track by their phones, because the nodes can pick up the signals, and track if you've actually walked into the business. So it's a little bit Big Brother, but actually a little bit Big Brother, but it works. And I did a case study with Evergreen Brickworks in Toronto and El Caballito, and it showed a 19.8 ROI, which was incredible.
Actually, both Starbucks and McDonald's, the ping technology that they have is remarkable.
Yeah.
Did you know that each mobile device has a unique ping? So that whether or not you actually walk into the Starbucks or the McDonald's, if you've ever connected to their Wi-Fi before and you walk by, that ping will map you back. So you've opted into this, of course, when you've downloaded the app and logged into your account. The one thing I noticed with the social Wi-Fi, brilliant for building a database, works extremely well. There are hardware considerations. Not every Wi-Fi router will allow you to do that. You have to have someone on staff who's sophisticated enough to be able to unlock the right port and then connect it to Facebook and so
Yeah,
on.
for sure. But from our agency perspective, we take care of all that for them. We try to make the client not work. Where and if it is compatible, you can start it up in less than a day. We can take that hardware and go with it. But the data collection is great, but for me the biggest thing is the fact that this company, ZenReach, is in so many huge chain restaurants that they have such a great amount of data of customer base that we get to use in custom audiences, lookalike audiences, and start profiling that customer.
So 5G is going to be a big game changer.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, I think in the end, regardless though, it's ZenReach's proprietary hardware and software that really make
So to keep things moving, I'm gonna talk a little bit about content marketing, and kind of building that strategy. And the basics of that content strategy is going to be your content calendar. So Brody, what kind of earlier you mentioned content pillars as being one of the pieces of that content calendar. Can you kind of go back into that now?
Yeah, content pillars is where we understand what's important to the business. What is it that's going to get the most engagement, and what is it that's going to get them the most money? So that could be from food, that could be from event bookings, that could be from corporate social responsibility. We want people to know that they're a part of the community, that they have this service pillar, and that's that they do care about certain organizations or partnerships. And so, from a content pillar perspective, it's very important to take that in consideration when building out the content calendars. Because the one thing I've learned in the past is that if you can come up and show a client the visual assets, which again, we're in a very subjective space when it comes to how this should look, or how the customer should look, or how the food should look, and how it should be portrayed, is that when you give that over to the client and they're like, well, I don't understand what this is achieving, because it's very subjective. And if you can break it down for them without visual assets, but break it down for them for an Instagram perspective, we build out a grid strategy that shows them the percentage of what that content is going to be. Event bookings, food, corporate responsibility. So that if we can break that down in front of them, that's super important.
And what are the other pieces of the distribution channels of that content calendar? Like, what are the other pieces that go into that other than just content pillars?
For me, the biggest thing is that we have to understand how the workflow of that business works too. Like, who is approving the content? For the Thompson, for example, food and beverage is dealt with by a very specific person. The events is dealt with a very specific person. We're also working with an agency in New York. So building out the workflow is also extremely important to know who's approving the content and how this all comes together.
I think the way that we try and approach it too is, going back to that persona or that target market, and then developing workflows that address the needs of those specific people, whether they're net new customer, repeat customer, restaurant visitor. I also think that the role for us as consultants is to put that strategy and framework in place, understanding that long term that brand is likely going to bring that in-house, and our role then becomes, we may switch gears and look at what area of the business can we focus on next as the consultant. I think that ultimately writing some sort of guidelines, or whether this is how an Instagram post looks, or this is what. Go ahead.
Yeah, and one thing that we realize is that if we can build out a 60 to 120 day strategy day by day, because again, their goal is to have somebody come in-house for the most part, right? The business is supposed to get to a point where it needs to come in-house. So being able to build out a strategy that somebody can then replicate and stay on track for what we've built as a foundation for the business is always great. So building that strategy is another big piece that we found to be very, very successful.
I think we've also moved away from creating a strategy that exists in a binder that sits on someone's desk that no one ever looks at. How can we create something that's nimble, as a 1 or 2 page Google Doc or something that they can then.
You mentioned Google Docs and Stephen leaves. Sorry. He hates the big Google platform. And we've been using it, all three of us, the last couple of days.
Well, I think he likes to red pen things too, so that's
as part of your social strategy, influencer marketing it's got some pros and cons to it.
I was going to ask you, that guy must have been smart to stay 30 days. Come on.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, she was.
The place is great. The food is.
Actually, the content that she produced was amazing.
Okay. Yeah. The good ones are great.
And she was excellent. The quality of the content was great, and I think this actually dives right into it. The quality of the content was great. We thought what would happen was that we put out a call to influencers and said, come live in the brand new JW Marriott and the Douglas in Vancouver for the first month that we're open. And so we put the call out there. We had hundreds of influencers apply to come, and they got paid. They also got paid a a working
Oh, wow.
salary
Stipend, wow.
stipend that was on par with industry standards for what someone would make in that role. They lived in the hotel and they needed to produce content based on that. Now, we thought that the traditional press would pick up on this. It was going to be the next Tourism Australia best job in the world. It barely got picked up. And the other influencers didn't pick up the influencer that was actually covering. And we had a very difficult time. We weren't working with Blue Door, obviously. We had a very difficult time because we expected there to be reach. So what did we do? We allocated funds and we boosted the posts. But then it just became advertising. Right? Was it really influencer marketing at that point?
Because I think the biggest thing I always say to clients is like, the best thing that we can do is get other people to tell your story, to be your brand advocate through third-party validation. And so that's why you see a lot of our biggest thing is to show user-generated content, to show that we're not the only ones creating this content. People actually eat our food or live in our hotels.
Other than just us.
Other than just us. It's so important.
But it needs has a sense, like some of it needs to have that clandestine insider, I'm just doing this because I want, because it is that cool, and that's the Malcolm Gladwell. I mean, that's where it started, right? I mean, that's where it started. So now I find that companies are trying to cultivate that in ways that are disingenuous. It's like someone, or the influencer is disingenuous. They're making a living off of doing this for all kinds of other things.
And people can smell it,
Yeah.
The consumer is becoming jaded. Is this paid content? Is this an influencer? Is this... And all of a sudden now we have so many influencers out there, we're now paying people to use our product.
Yeah.
Right.
And then,
So many in the restaurant space, unbelievably. How to filter through those.
It's a lot.
But you were trying to have opposing viewpoints. I know that you're very pro-influencer, and so am I in certain ways.
No, I'm not anti-influencer. I'm just saying that you have to. It's careful because some of that it's very robotic. I mean,
Let's have Brody talk about how your thought process has changed about influencers over time.
Over time, I think the platforms change over time. The way that we interact, the way that the influencer economy has changed so much. And I think if you went back 5-6 years ago, oh my God, influencers were the best thing ever.
Right.
And then now, because there's so many and everyone thinks they're one, and it's easy to fake that you are one, that it's hard to then decipher who actually is going to prove some ROI without actually paying them first to test it out. And it's hard to sell that to a client. And so from our perspective is that, yes, some of them work.
Right.
Some of them do work because you do want the locality. You want for a restaurant in Toronto, Taste Toronto, for example, that's a great Instagram account. They've done nothing but great things, and we pay them $30,000-$40,000 a year just to run ads for our account. But it's also about being strategic too. You want to be able to. You have to understand Taste Toronto's following is likely going to also be another Instagram account's following to a percentage. So you don't want to duplicate your efforts and spend so much money. You want to make sure that it's all strategic and that the way that you roll things out is great. So they do sometimes do great ROI, especially if you do like a lead gen campaign or contesting. Those are always usually the great ones. However, I would say I'm like 60% pro influencer, 40% like con. So like for me, it's just there's a element to it where you have to really pay to test it out, and then you as the agency or consultant are on the hook because you referred it in the first place. And you can't really know until it's there. So from our perspective, from restaurants, is we've come from like a space of having a influencer and then actually inviting people of influence. So it doesn't mean that you have 60,000 people. It doesn't mean that you bring the people that is the Tom that is on Bay Street, who if he walks into the office and tells you, I just went to this restaurant, that in itself is going to be someone who is of influence, and you can invite them into the restaurant at cost. So everything is at
going
cost.
back to the good old way that we did it in this city when I moved here in 1990 after Cornell Katie, and that's what we did. We got to know the key influencers in Yorkville or in Hazelton Lanes or Bloor Street, and we invited them in one by one.
And the management process behind that is relatively on par with what you have to deal with an influencer anyways, without really having to pay them. So there's like that part of it too, is being able to invite even media outlets, the Bay Street Bull, the Toronto Life, and we just let our restaurants know like, hey, like this is someone who wants to come in, and we just let them go in and
Which
they
is
get
really
what they need.
traditional PR methodology.
Yeah, and if you combine that with the right influencers, like the ecosystem of that can be very plentiful. Yeah.
So what,
Bill and then Jillian.
Stephanie, can I ask a general question?
Go for it.
Okay. So this organization ultimately has 50, maybe 60, could have 60 consultants. The likely target audience for this group would be owners, managers, management companies, so forth. Probably not digital marketing companies. Question I have-
Developers, owners.
Hmm?
Developers.
Developers. No. From that perspective, what advice would you be giving to us to tell them about how do I execute an effective digital marketing activity across my organization? And I'll give you an example that I tell my clients because I have. Don't do it yourself. Don't even go there because you'll never be able to get at it. So if you were telling us what to tell them, this is 50 or 60, what do we tell them? What do we tell our clients?
Hire us.
Well, that too, but okay, we'll take a commission.
Give me a good job.
All right, baby, in general, what do you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, like from.
Are you trying to convince them to do this?
Yeah. I'm trying to convince them to either do it better, do it more effectively than they're currently doing it. That's what I'm trying
I think
to
there's a lot of agencies that are very cookie cutter in terms of their
Yeah.
approach. They're like, you know, without knowing anything about your hotel, restaurant, or your business or your operations, they
Right.
make very generalized things about how much you should spend and what you should do it. And I think all three of us up here are much more individualized in our methodology in terms of what you suggest. And I guess I would start there in terms of. But I also say, even though you don't want to do it in house, you also need someone that can speak to it in house.
Exactly.
So you need a representative of your company that is
A champion.
Yes, that can be that go-to person for somebody on the agency side, because otherwise,
Somebody internal.
sometimes it's hard to talk to the, you know.
So internal, what else?
One of the things that, from Blue Door's perspective, that we're actually building out, because I see a huge need for it. It's sometimes, I'm very passionate about the clients that we have. So when they leave, in the sense that they just hire someone in-house, we train them, we've done everything.
All right.
It's great, but it's like a baby was just taken away from me. Because you do, that's the part of the agency life too. So we're in the process right now of building what we call like an academy, where we actually are going to be the ones that these individual people can come to regardless of where they are geographically, because the best part of this world is you don't need to be in the city per se, is being able to have an academy of leaders that can train these people on a daily, weekly basis, so much like what we're doing right now, right? Being able to come to a place where we can strategize with that internal person of that property or what have you, and make sure that they're on point and give those suggestions. So that's something that we've always been like gnawing over, is how do we best execute that, where again, without coming from like a cookie cutter, like bad taste in your mouth, like what this just
Right.
it's boring and stale, where we have to dive in and know about the business and know about the profile and really help that person who's internal achieve the goals that ultimately their boss or the company needs.
Okay.
I have a bit of a different take. I like that, Brody. I think that there has to be more of an investment into content.
Okay.
Imagery, video, storytelling as a whole, and the regular production of that content. Maybe not daily, but at least weekly. And the reason I say that is I think that the distribution mechanisms, the Googles, the LinkedIns, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, they'll change and they'll evolve, but the humans are not going to be pulling the levers as much on those platforms. But those platforms are all hungry for fresh, unique, interesting content.
Yeah.
Like, when was the last time your client went and updated their TripAdvisor photography? You know? Or when was the last time they added a great new video to TripAdvisor? Or the GMs hopefully are responding to all of the Google reviews, but were they going back in and making sure that all of that information in that Google My Business listing is accurate? Google My Business also has a social component now, not Google Plus, but where you can add posts and content on a regular basis. Once a week would be great. So I think that the brands need to double down on content production and development, and that is something that is very expensive to outsource.
And it's not easy. We need to rely internally and orchestrate somebody prompting and prodding to tell great stories. Jillian has a question.
Well, it was about influencers. We sort of moved on with it. But one of the best people that I've recently hired for one of our properties is a copywriter. And she is dynamite. And she writes now our blog and newsletter. She handles all our contents and makes recommendations for updates to the content on the website. So, because we're so busy in our lives, we don't have time to go to Google Plus and TripAdvisor and whatever. And so she is my, she's my person who she's got access to a lot of these things herself now. She posts her own blog. She gives them to me to read through and everything else, but she posts her own because I just didn't have time. And you're absolutely right. Content is.
So think back to our indigenous cultures, where the whole society was based on storytelling.
Yes.
And storytelling that was passed from generations and neighbors to neighbors.
Yeah.
And within our hotels, we used to do this. And other than Bill, and maybe Chuck, nobody else in this room is old enough to remember, where we used to have PR people who would go around the hotel every day and pull stories out of various departments, human interest stories, whether it was marathons or whether it was personal achievements. We've pulled those stories out for years.
So she did 4 or 5 stories about the 40th anniversary of independence for St. Lucia. And Travel Pulse, which is a US trade publication, just picked up one of her stories yesterday about the coat of arms for St. Lucia.
Chris?
I think one of the challenges too is that often these stories that we as marketers and consultants are trying to produce are inherently self-promotional. Whereas we wrote a story the other day that we posted to LinkedIn and Facebook about someone leaving. So someone who left our company, who went to HelloFresh and got a wonderful job there, and we celebrated that. She spent 3 years with us. We're doing another story about one of our employees and their volunteer activities that they're doing. Or we have a fellow that moved from India. This is his first job outside of school in India, and he's come to Canada, and he lives with his 2 best friends in a tiny apartment up the street. Like, that is an interesting story that people want to read.
And that is, I'm going to segue, that's going to take you as a company into the Glassdoor realm, where we tell stories that prospective employees find out about us because of the brilliant, wonderful stories and the portrayal of the culture that attracts the brightest and the best.
And Glassdoor is a social platform. It allows you to make posts as well. You can add a blog post to Glassdoor. So while you're adding this to LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, you can also put a version on Glassdoor. Oh gosh, Glassdoor.
How many of you know what Glassdoor is? Good, 50% or more. How many of you use it?
Well, look at it, but no. Well, I did post something
2 or 3
way back. Yeah.
So I think how much time do we have? I have one question.
I would like you to have less than 10 minutes.
Perfect, I can do it. Just so I know where we're at, that's what I had on my clock. So, I think, coming from at least for me, coming from the hotel space, it changed every day in terms of different guests and different people you're interacting with. But I feel like as I've switched over into the digital space, I actually, it's always about putting more tools in your arsenal and kind of selecting what trends are going to be the next best thing and which ones you're going to jump on the bandwagon versus not. So as it turns into, Chris, I know your company does a lot with automation, machine learning, and that's kind of a hot topic. Can you talk about how you use that to automate social ads and maybe what that looks like for the organization moving forward for you guys?
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of machine learning and AI. We're implementing it for a lot of our real estate clients. I think that Facebook and Google have the ability to write their own ads. So we still need the copywriter to tell the stories, but the ad copy, literally writes itself, or can write itself. And I'll give you an example of that. this was already developed 2 years ago. It's not fully implemented yet, but it exists today in terms of what Google's able to do. So if you were to give Google access to your photo drive, whatever platform that might be, if you've got it in Google Drive or if you have it in
Don't look at me, I hate Google.
I know you do. That's why I was pointing. So you give Google access to your file storage for your photos. And then you also give Google access to read your website. Google can read your website, look at your photos, and design ads on scale. Now they design a different ad for Stephanie than they will for me or they will for Brody. Let's say I do a search for a room with a hot tub. Google will, in a fraction of a tenth of a second, write an ad based on what rooms have hot tubs at a hotel in a city that I'm looking for, based on the data that we're feeding it. So we're moving away from the copywriter writing 35 characters for the first line, 35 characters for the next line. Doesn't matter. It's all out the window because the robots can write those ads. And that was 2 years ago. They also can recognize what type of people to put in those ads. So maybe because I have a young family, they might show a photo of a family. For Brody, recognizing that he's a single young man living in the downtown part of the city, they might show him something that would appeal to him. And doing that in real time, this is not just, and customizing for the individual. There's a big future for machine learning and AI, and you can't tell the difference as the consumer.
But those are milliseconds too.
Milliseconds. By the time you do a search in Google versus the results that you see, like we all see different results in Google now because the whole experience is customized to us. So that I see a big future in that. I think that we are in control of our data and our customer databases and the content that we can feed into these engines, and that's what we should be focusing on. I think that you as consultants, though, are positioned really well because the robots can't write strategy. They're not particularly creative. They can't go take the photo or hire the talent to be in that photo or capture that housekeeper's story. So they still need someone to come up with that overarching strategy and to create a system and a platform and an editorial calendar. The robots can't do that. So that's where I think consultants there's huge value in what we provide.
Yeah, and I think even from my perspective is like, again, there's times where like you can just smell a robot. And I think from a hospitality perspective, sometimes that does the opposite of what you want. People love the human to human element as well. And from what I would say is like what to look at, like what I would say is going to become very strong is kind of right now is the ability to show what's happening now. Content, people are more prepared to be engaging in content that's happening now than something that's been a static post that was from 2 or 3 days ago. So that's Instagram Live, that is doing live streaming, and I know you guys had just went to live stream, and again, it was engaging because it was live, it was happening now. I think these social platforms, for the most part, and this is the part where Snapchat, I think, got it right, is that everything was happening now, you knew it was happening in real time, versus watching videos of something like a restaurant launch, and you're like, oh, where is it, what's happening, and it's a week ago. And there's no point to that. So I think there's a huge push that, and I think a lot of these platforms, if not already, are going to be really pushing what's happening now, live streaming and pushing content that people know is within the same time.
Two questions, Bill, then Alan.
The question I have is, and I sort of asked this before, is if I'm a manager or owner, and I'm trying to understand it, how do I pull it all together? Because I want to have digital marketing, I want to have my brand website optimized, search engine optimization, search engine marketing, display ads, social media, influencer marketing. How do I pull it together? And I mean pull it together from at a high level, at a management level. Do I go to an agency that provides all that services? Is that the way to go? Do I parse it out to other agencies? That's question one. And question two, how do I internally know I'm successful or not? How do I monitor it?
Have you met Stephanie yet?
Well, I think also you need a quarterback on your team.
Okay, good.
You need a quarterback. And it can't be the lowest paid employee. It can't be that intern who knows social media or that coordinator that just
uses social media. I see them using it.
Bingo.
So you need a quarterback, I think, that also knows data and can do the ROI that the senior level executive or the owner wants to see. And that data analyst person who also has a skill set that they can talk to humans and they're not a backroom person, they can then manage your agencies, your copywriters, your content writers, I think. And from an agency perspective, we need someone on the other end to interface with that speaks our language, that allows us to move quickly.
I think what Chris actually said, agencies, and I'm sure you guys can do everything, but at least on the client side, I've probably hired, 25 different agencies, and every agency is good at some things and bad at certain things. Even though they say they're full service, I get it. You have to figure out what even with Cayuga and how we've changed and broken out who does our website is different from SEO versus who does our strategy.
Exactly.
So it's about, I don't think that very seldom is one agency to do your whole overarching strategy usually the right path to go.
I'll debate on. I think someone needs to own the overarching strategy.
Exactly.
I believe that someone, so that they, and maybe that's the quarterback, I'm not sure, but that all of the different agencies or consultants or individuals are working up under one strategy. What I worry is happening right now is that the different people that are working on the projects are operating in silos. And so I believe that someone needs to own that, whether it's a lead agency or it's a quarterback.
Well, in agencies, as we talked about with the blogging, get over your ego, be able to work with other agencies, be friends, for the end result of the client, for the greater good of the client. And there's some agencies are not open to working with other agencies.
Alan? Yeah, this has all been discussing kind of outside the restaurant or hotel. Do you guys go inside, and what is your strategy to the customer who's already in there, trying to get them to be a more loyal customer? How do you use your because that's where you're really going to grow, from their return visits, from their, what do you do how do you strategize within?
Yeah, no, for sure. We're very hands-on with the restaurants and hotels that we work with, specifically restaurants. We train I think we brought it up about lowest paying person. If you go into a restaurant, you're first greeted by a hostess or a host, and they're probably one of the lowest paid people there. And yet they're your first point of contact, whether you call them or walk in. And they're so disinterested. They're it's painful. And it's my first thing. For example,
constantly.
Right.
The same person is never at the door.
And it's never it's mind-boggling to me. So I get it, from a perspective of that. For Ricardo's, if you're familiar with them in Toronto, my first recommendation was to get them a team lead. You can have the lower paying ones running around, but at least get a team lead that's well paid that can manage that process, because that's going to be consistent in everything else that we're working hard towards. And I'll give you an example of that, because we did a test with Google Ads where we were targeting a Mexican restaurant in the distillery to come to a Mexican restaurant in King West. And so one of those things was we got to record the calls that we're going through. I was listening to probably 30, 40, 50 calls every 4 hours. The ads were working. But what I realized is that this person on the phone thought they were in the distillery. They didn't know where they worked. And it was ridiculous, because they had, again, it was somebody who was being paid minimal amount and had no interest in what was actually happening. And so we stopped the campaign. I said, we need to set up a proper system here where your hostess team have basic customer service skills.
Training system.
A training system, yeah, because we do that. We've set up, for example, we have one restaurant group that has 6 different locations. They're all different brands. And that's why I think you guys had spoken to Stephen from Chase Hospitality.
Yes, this morning.
Yeah, so being able to have somebody who can, again, answer a phone, from that perspective, I don't think it should ever be a robot. I think it's what people want to talk to somebody. They're calling you for a reason. If they want to go through a robot, go through the chat bots. Those do work really well. But I think if someone's calling a restaurant, it's urgent. They want to book something. And so having that system there and being involved in that perspective is great, because that's how you get the customer coming back. That's how you build that relationship. And we deal with both an online and offline world that they both need to live cohesively.
To go back to your point, I don't think our agency does a good enough job of that in-hotel experience. And recently I discovered a brand that is doing it exceptionally well. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the Great Wolf Lodge. But
If you have kids, you know it.
my mind was absolutely blown with how well they catered to not only my child's needs, but my needs to have a glass of wine while I was in the Great Wolf Lodge. And the app, I ordered pizza on the app in the hotel. It was remarkable. And this was in California. I'm already looking at going to the one for my son's birthday in Niagara Falls. Now they managed to also get so much money out of my pocket while I was in the hotel. That model is brilliant.
Pattison Group owns it, by the way, Jim Pattison. Can I remind everybody who's old enough that we used to have things called implants? Not this type of implant, but when Amex and Carlson and all the other big travel agencies put implants, they put their travel professionals into the office of Major Tom, Blue Door, whoever it may be. They put them into the office so that they became part of the office culture, but at the same time, they were experts in what they did. And I would see an opportunity, not forever, but that you have a system, a method, a financial structure where when your clients need them, that you send your people in your two respective disciplines into Planta, as Stephen was talking about earlier, the Mexican restaurant, as you were referring to, Brody, and actually go in and immerse yourself in the culture. And you can remember when Dana Barkley did that with us. They sent Julie, they sent Fawn from their office into our hotel to immerse themselves in the culture. And they went back to their agencies and they wrote stories. They didn't take photos, we would stage a photo later. But I think we used to do that much better than it's being done today, and we've forgotten that principle.
So it's just a kind of a recap. I challenged these gentlemen and myself as well, because I like to be action oriented. I think there's a lot of different tools and things that have been mentioned, but I do have just a couple of slides, and they're not necessarily, they're more either books to read, blogs to follow, or free tools that you can try out. So each one of us has a couple different takeaways that are actionable that you can, kind of either to continue learning on your own or just to, play around with some fun tools. So we'll share that as well.
We'll send that out. We'll send Brody and Chris's information to everybody. Any more questions for the panel? My challenge to you, what would you like out of this group? What can we do for you? Especially Chris, who's operating in the U.S., but Brody, as you said, you don't need to be there to do it.
Yeah.
Tell us what this group of consultants and our colleagues who are not here today can do to help you.
Yeah, again, going back, I would love to be hired. But the biggest thing is, if there's something that you guys could help us do is take away some of the things that, in the takeaway deck as well, there's the case study I provided for the social Wi-Fi, so you guys can take a look at that. I think the other thing is that I included in there was, for example, the Seth Godin's blog, which I think is a blog that comes up every single day that I actually forward over to clients as well, just the way they can think. But from that, take away that's what I would say. I would say take those things away and think about how the landscape will change again. The social landscape is going to change again. It's always going to. And I think just being able to think on probe your clients or to think differently about how to stand out differently from clients, from the marketing minutia that everybody keeps doing, and just start thinking about different ways of doing it. Whether that be a different way you shoot. Like we just were at the Thompson, we had one of our staff upside down with her feet up with a glass of wine, and it was it's different. Someone's going to scroll by that, and it's going to look different. And then if you guys reach out to me at any time. There's a lot of really great tools that I didn't include in there. That cinematography, like cinemagraphs and Flixel, all those things that could be really beneficial to you or your client.
Chris?
Yeah, I guess my ask is connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll send you a request after this. If you could accept that would be wonderful. I think too that when I first talked to Stephen about doing this event, he gave me such a chance in business. I want to be able to help out where I can, and so I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any feedback to a point, of course. But at least in the spirit of community and giving back, I'd like to be able to help out where I can.
Well, Chris has already expressed that, and when we were looking for a new agency, and his agency, he admitted, was not right for Cayuga, he said, let me be a part of the team. We were already almost finished at that point, and I appreciated that offer to say, I'm not for you, but I will help you find the right person. And it was, so.
Thank you very much.